Hi, everybody. Welcome in. This is
All right.
oh,
We are live.
Okay. This is in Unionism Spiritual Discussion. This is the Our World Today, the Unionist perspective. Okay, we're good now. And today we're going to talk about a bunch of themes on basically the government and world powers like providing safety and security and like their responsibility as leaders to the people and our responsibility as well there. So we're just going to talk about all kinds of things that are related to that, developments in the Ukraine war, the earthquakes in southeastern Turkey, and the architectural issues that were there. We will talk about the train derailment in Ohio and all kinds of other things that may enter in. So, without further ado, let's get started, you guys. Do you guys have a topic that, hi, Irene. Do you guys have a topic that you want to start with? What feels juiciest to you?
The train derailment sounds juicy for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Although the health hazards have not been juicy, but the topic.
Yeah, that's where my train of thought was going to. So, sorry.
Something that just popped up I found so interesting was the train's overbearing and overheated wheel what caused the derailment. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's what the issue was. And apparently during the Trump administration, there was an act to either remove the safety measure for an electric brake or not put it in there altogether. I'm not sure either or, but the fact that there has been measures that went through the justice system to prevent this, and it wasn't taken into court, and then this happened, shows for the safety measures that could have been taken, and that will be mentioned throughout all of our stories today.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds dire. Not good. But yeah, do you guys want to maybe just summarize the story of what happened for people a little bit?
Yeah. Basically, it was like earlier this month, like I think it was February 3rd or 5th, there was a train, and it was like a train of the Norfolk Southern Company, the railroad company. And there's just a few regional companies in the US, and they're really big companies. They're definitely making record profits, and economically they're taking a lot in. But like Nadia was saying, a couple years ago or a few years ago, there was a request from workers and people who were actually working on the trains, and there were recommendations to have like an improved braking system and other safety improvements on trains. And Norfolk Southern has a track record of lobbying against any of these safety measures because they cost money to implement and they want to maximize their profit as much as possible. And that's just it. It's all about that, the bottom line. And there's some conflict between like people who actually work there and people who make the big decisions, And what happened was there was this train carrying like tons of chemical that was carcinogenic and other chemicals, but the main one was vinyl chloride. And it just with the derailment of the train, it went everywhere. To prevent a big explosion, they had to do a controlled burn of the chemicals, which is the less of the two outcomes, So, but it's still burning these chemicals, and so now they're spilling out into wherever, the water table, the rivers, and that's what has been going on. And it's not like a historically isolated incident. It's something that has happened all over the world in all different areas. Basically, anytime that people like raise concerns about safety, and then basically there's a feeling that the leadership is saying that they want to prioritize like cutting costs over ensuring safety. And we can talk about some of those examples, but that's basically it. And the government there and government agencies have been saying it is safe to be there now, but residents have been kind of saying that they see a lot of dead animals and stuff around there, and they kind of doubt that, that it is safe to be there. So there's kind of this like debate going on about it. Yeah, so I feel like this one, well, what do you guys feel about this topic? Like, what is the truth of what's going on here? I feel like it's not very hard to spot, but maybe.
I wanted to ask you before we get into our feelings. I'm not sure if anyone really knows the answer to this, but what was the reason why the government isn't issuing another train company for that region? Like, is that dominated by Norfolk? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the train companies are these big regional companies, and the problem is like with trains, how they developed is the industries are allowed to have a local monopoly kind of, unless they build more railroad lines, because like if you have a ton of railroad companies using like the same tracks or stuff, that's just a recipe for a lot of like confusion, and it can be unsafe. So that's kind of why. Yeah, and also like they've lobbied for it hard. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's not like, it's kind of both. And I feel like, isn't it like in other countries, like in France, for example, the railroads are like state owned, or is that, I don't
They
remember.
were until a few years ago, and now they're starting to be in a competitive market because the market is changing. But they, for the most part, they still are, and they were for like decades. But yeah, it really differs from country to country, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just wondering, because I was like, it kind of makes sense for like maybe a railroad to be a state-owned thing, or to be owned by just a few companies, because
It depends, yeah. But yeah, I feel like they want to reduce costs. They did that in the UK too, in the 60s or the 80s, I don't remember. And basically it was a hard transition because there were a lot of accidents in company-owned trains until something changed. So I feel like we've seen this in several countries. We've seen this in the UK, we've seen this a little bit in France and Japan, but it feels like probably the government is saying like, oh, it's happening elsewhere, it's not going to happen here, and we need to prioritize cost, is what I feel. But yeah, it's it's a kind of sad that we're seeing the history repeat. I would say like it's a good lesson in the region because like most probably the people there won't want to repeat the experience, but internationally, globally, I think the consciousness is still in some ways prioritizing the wrong things or making bad choices. And the way Sage described the situation was it felt a little bit like Chernobyl in the way they're handling it, which is not a good comparison. So yeah, but I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I feel like, I don't remember, with Chernobyl, did the Soviet government say like everything's okay, guys, like you can go back there?
Yeah,
They did? Oh my
Most
God.
people did. Most people did, and even in Europe in general, they said like it's not like the cloud is stopping at the frontier of Ukraine, and nobody is going to be affected. And I think no one actually knew how much we were close to like the end of the world, and they still wanted to like shut down anyone that was against the government and against the reputation. I don't know if you've seen the HBO series, but it was pretty. They did the most they could to say that it was okay when it was not, and even to the population gaslighting them or like, and didn't listen to the scientists that said that it was not okay, you know. So yeah.
Isn't it not okay even today, like to go near that area? Even
It's
now,
still
it's emitting.
a no safe living zone, yeah.
Yeah.
In the city it happened. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think when people go there, they have to wear protection, protective suits, and yeah, the city is like completely overgrown with plants, and there's a bunch of like deer and wolves and a bunch of animals like run wild through Chernobyl now.
It's a great documentary. I mean, that's the one I saw in HBO, right? Or Netflix? Can't remember.
I think there's several things. Like HBO was actually a fiction,
Mm,
but that related the story on the point of view of scientists that were there for
okay.
several months. And there's probably a documentary on Netflix too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I watched the one with the great actor. I can't remember his name, but he did a great job. And I do remember the negligence that happened because of trying to save cost, same as the train derailment, of
Yeah.
trying to save cost, and then this happens. And I think I read somewhere that even if they saved cost, they would still make, I mean, even if they did the safety measures, they would still make massive profits, but
Yeah,
it wasn't an interest for them.
yeah.
So I think that's what is so upsetting, um, as well as the PGE water, PEG water containment. That was just like for them to try to cover it up and say that it wasn't harmful water that they were um, putting in, I think, near Los Angeles.
Mhm.
That was something else too.
Yeah, I was reading about the details that Chrissy posted about that one, and they've had scientific studies throughout the years that have said, like some of them have said, like, yes, this chromium, it was like called chromium 6, and it was like, yes, this is carcinogenic and harmful for people. And some have said there was too little in the water to actually harm people. Some have said chromium 6 is not carcinogenic to people. And there's really been a lot of scientific debate. And I feel like in America and all over probably much of the world, there's a feeling of like you feel like you just can't trust these recommendations and these people because of how much like money influences it, like how much not money per se, but yeah, their choice to use their money for their agenda, like of greed. And that one has been contentious, but California still like set limits for how much of that chemical can be in water. And they still like paid out a bunch of money in a lawsuit to the people, of that town. So, but one thing though is true is that there wasn't transparency about it from the beginning. Like the company never said, hey, you guys, we're going to be dumping this stuff into the kind of surrounding environment. Like we don't know what the effects will be, but we just wanted to give you a heads up. Like there's none of that. There was none of that, but that was in the 50s and 60s. So that was also like it was a time when people weren't as aware of those kind of things. And I think we have grown maybe a tiny bit there, but I feel like this just keeps repeating itself until maybe a fractional marginal micro amount. It's improved our consciousness of it, but I feel like mostly it's all in us to have faith that it's okay for us to like have those boundaries, have safety and be supported first, and that we won't like suffer economically if we have that in place. I feel it's kind of like deep down, it's kind of a poverty mentality rather than a wealth mentality, to be like, we should ignore safety to try to make money right now, you know? Yeah.
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 I'm curious to know what Andrea is thinking about that, and Nadia too. Sorry, it's like almost, I don't know, it feels like deep down we all know that the true choice of love would be the choice that respects us and honors us and our safety, and then makes profits, because we know that there are solutions that do make profits too. We just need to make a different choice, but it's not being made. And the thing is, like, it improved by a margin, but I feel it improved in the space where people were demanding accountability for the actions of doing this. So it's not a real improvement. It's not an improvement with the intention of having safety first. So it's not true. It's not based on truth and love. That's what I felt, at least.
It was me when Sage was talking, I was thinking about what is happening in Flint or has happened. I'm not even sure if they have Flint, Michigan, if they've even sorted out the water issue, but it was like a similar thing where there was kind of like there was a water contamination crisis. And but in the Flint situation, it seemed to be, and I could be wrong, I haven't recently like read up on this, but it seemed to affect like the poorest areas in the city where the actual contamination was. And so I don't know, it just made me think of kind of like there seems to be like a poverty mindset on the leadership side, but also in areas that might be most affected. There also might be like a similar choice where they're just not empowering themselves and holding people accountable. Whereas like and that's maybe where we see like the marginal differences. Like in LA, it seemed to be figured out, but only maybe because there was a choice being made on the people's end to kind of hold individuals accountable and to step into their power. But I agree, I feel like there's just like this there's like a fear of like safety and comfort, and so it's like this like hoarding, greedy energy, especially from like the leadership. Yeah, that's where my mind went.
Yeah, I was going to say about the train derailment, even the people voted for those who accepted the lobbyists that weren't going to put safety measurements. So in a way, consciously or not, they did accept that kind of leadership to not put their own safety measures into priority. And so it goes into empowering as well as for the leadership to recognize where's their priorities going as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just to follow up on what we talked about earlier, those same railway workers were asking for, like, they were going to do a strike, remember, like last December, and Congress had the authority, like based on a law, to settle the disputes themselves between like the railroads and the workers, remember? And they were like, they created a measure, they created an agreement or a settlement, I'm gonna say, where they said like, you get paid a little bit better. Actually, it was pretty good pay increase, but you get paid better. You get a few other things, but you still don't have any paid sick days as a railroad worker. And I was like, how do you guys feel about that now? Because now we're kind of seeing like, well, this wasn't a case of like a railroad worker who like made a mistake because they weren't feeling well, but they went to work anyway. It was a case of like railroads they weren't held to the standard of safety. But like, what do you guys feel about like the Congress and President Biden's decision now, you know what I mean? To impose an agreement and not give the workers paid sick days. Do you feel like that was the best choice that they could do to avoid a railroad strike, which would be hard for the economy? Or do you feel like it was not serving lives? You know?
I feel like it wasn't a very, I don't know. I feel at its core, something feels unloving to me about it. Not necessarily like the decision that was made, but more so like the lack of dialogue, it seems like. It seems like the government tried to just I don't know. I always feel like the worker side is always kind of ignored, and especially in situations like this where it seems like the focus and the priority is on the bottom line, which is always making money and like lowering costs, maximizing profits. And so I think that agreement that happened kind of underlined that same sort of feeling that I think is also related to them taking shortcuts and just like these safety measures. I feel like there's also a choice on the worker end that maybe they don't feel empowered and they're not really like choosing that. But a lot of times I feel like it just like trickles like top down sometimes in these like structures, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
I think Sage, you hit it on the head when you said these safety measures. I forget the line you said, but the safety measures that weren't addressed. And then Andia, you mirrored it well, because going from top to bottom, like not to recognize the safety measures that were needed within their workers in healthcare. And it also was reflected in their equipment. So it's like a whole team that's working. And if you don't give safety measures to your employees, and you won't get that in your equipment. And I'm sure someone had missed a misalignment within the train. Like if you're driving the train and something within the wheel is feeling heavy bared and you feel something off, maybe if you're not at the best of health, how could you tell for the equipment that you're using? So
Yeah, you said it. I agree. It's like same story, but different side. Just like not honoring humans and safety in all of its components of a whole of a train, railroad workers and companies, and just a section of the markets. And yeah, I feel like, as I said market, I was like, I felt something in my heart. So I feel like it's maybe a call to remember that market and business are about love too. And there should be God there too, you know. It's not separate. And I feel like it would heal so many upsets when we start to see how it's not separate and it's actually a whole. And yeah, that's just what I wanted to say about it.
Yeah, I wondered too if you guys wanted to move on and talk briefly about Turkey and like the President Erdogan's government, or did you guys have anything else you wanted to add about the train derailment? Yeah.
No, Turkey fiscal feels good.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of, in Turkey, it's kind of the exact same thing. Like President Erdogan was in the media, they recorded him saying like, yeah, you know, we are, I think he said like, I built all this affordable housing, right, in this part of the country. and that's wonderful. It's so awesome. And he's like, yeah, I just, we just let the construction companies not build the buildings with proper like safety measures, basically. I mean, he didn't say it like that, but he said like, we just decided to like cut some costs, and now we have more affordable housing in Turkey. And I feel like it's like pretty much just the exact same thing. It's kind of him saying that he wanted a short-term gain of some sort of win. I feel like it speaks to I feel like it speaks to him feeling a little bit afraid and unstable as the leader, because he's so desperate to claim a win there and to alleviate issues of whatever it might be, like maybe poverty in his country, but that's not the way to do it. And he lives in an earthquake prone they live in an earthquake prone area. And yeah, what do you guys feel about it?
Yeah, some of the things I find crazy about this is they do live in an earthquake prone area, that they had a huge earthquake, I think 1999. And from then they had a tax on the people to build these very earthquake safe buildings, which they end up not doing. Another thing I find crazy is that he's so open with his political demise and strategy. Like, he's literally saying that I don't want misinformation going out from the people, because this is gonna be a political issue for me, basically. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. So the fact that within the day or two, he banned Twitter, he didn't send in forces for people to get out of the like the destruction that he caused and the presidency has caused before him, of just negligence. It's just crazy. Like, what I find most crazy is they know they're on this tectonic plate. They know this is so dangerous for people if they didn't have safety issues. And, and also seeing the people that they had to rely on their neighbors, they had to rely on their families to get them out, because the task force wasn't sent in right away. That was really heartbreaking to see in Syria and in Turkey, because Syria also didn't have up to code buildings as well and didn't take in measurements that they should have. So just crazy.
Yeah, I feel like the problem is foundational, pun intended. But because if you're not gonna put honor and value safety first, like Yurine was saying, you are prioritizing, you're putting greed first, then you're putting that like corruption first. And that is, I think, the choice that's being made. And it has to be, a new choice has to be made to honor and value safety first. That for human beings, that is foundational. Like, you have to have that has to come first. So we're seeing all of these patterns and these things repeat, and I really feel like that it's that choice. And I choose it now. I choose honor and value safety first.
It has to come first, you're right. And I choose it now too. It's amazing in the bad sense, how a government can choose to not prioritize safety in a natural disaster that they know. Like, Turkey is such a vulnerable place in terms of earthquakes. I know in the Caribbean we have safety measurements in place, even in the poorest of houses. And just like when you said we're minimizing the cost, it's not about minimizing the cost. It should be the law. But if it's not in the law, nobody's going to do it. And the funny thing, ironically, what we saw in the article was that even in luxury homes, it wasn't done. So it's not even about cost, it's about grade. It's really about grade. And that's sad. And I would say like when I was talking with Chrissy about like natural disasters and changing consciousness and the accelerating of innovation, I was thinking about a big disaster about a volcano eruption and earthquake that happened in Colombia in the 90s. And they were prioritizing cost because like evacuating the population was too costly and they lost like 80,000 people. And it could have been prevented because the national volcanologists community was saying for several months that it was a dangerous kind of volcano and that they needed to evacuate. And it actually became law around the world that we should evacuate if these kinds of things were repeated and happened. And so I feel like I was like having this example in mind when I said this. And it's a good example of how actually it saved like many lives afterwards in other eruptions throughout the world in the decades that had followed. And it just like, it was so simple. It was just a choice, really just a choice. And yeah, but you have to be willing to make the choice. And what Nadia is saying from Erdogan is that he's not making the choice right now. It's just like kind of like the Soviet Union. It feels like saving face first, and then taking care of the people.
Yeah, and it's like, especially in those governments that aren't democracies, like that are dictatorships, basically, or authoritarian states, like that is the case. And dissent is like harshly responded to. They're not open to that. But it's kind of the same though, in that we're seeing in other countries that are democracies. It's just it works differently, that moneyed interests are, people are allowing moneyed interests to have more power than them, basically. And it's probably true in those countries too, but there's also that added element of like, you know, whatever the government says is like what is correct. And it's a lesson for people to really claim their power and to heed if there's like a feeling of like, or like a warning of something is not right here. Because fortunately, Erdogan openly said that he avoided safety regulations. So you could take that as information that's valuable and not live there, you know. And it's not saying like, oh, you should have done that. That's not at all the message, but the message is just for people's healing and to put their safety first, and to not jump at something just because like, oh, this is an opportunity for something inexpensive for me, like right now, you know. It's like, yeah. So
Yeah, I wanted to take this opportunity to mention about taking health measures when it comes to women's health, and the fact that we had a push for more research on health issues. That was great to hear. I don't know if you guys want to transition into that or go. Okay. So in New Jersey, there was a congresswoman, Nikki, I don't recall her name, but she's putting a big push for women's health as well as women's research, especially because heart attacks are the number one cause of death for women. And I think that's so reflective of even the train derailment story, because when you are not taking care of the health issues, you will see parts that are derailing. And when you look at Lewis Hayes, that spiritually symbolizes what the body parts are to your emotions, the heart represents love and the blood represents joy. So when women are in large numbers having heart attacks, their heart, their love is not being able to be expressed in this corporate world, this world of like looking into profits and money. This is what I'm seeing is mostly due to heart attacks when women are, I guess, pushed into like divine masculine roles or not joyfully living their lives. So yeah, it goes back to a health issue of, are you taking care of your health, and like the need for health issues to be looked at. And I'm really glad that they're pushing for now women's health, because research is much needed for that in the other perspective. Doctors are saying of only half of the specialists for health are well known for women's health, whereas it should be 100% for men's and women's health. So, looking into why this is systematically happening in large numbers in women and what they're being, what issues in their life they're neglecting and causing heart attacks can be shown in our environment too, and the foundation of being destructed as well. What do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know heart problems look very different for men and women. In France, a few years ago, we had a campaign about really identifying how it looked for a woman and how it was different, because it was not something that was done usually in school, whereas we learn how heart attacks look and heart problems look for men. And yeah, I just feel like it's a good step forward. And it's also, you said something about like how even doctors sometimes don't know how to handle these problems. And I think it's generalized throughout medicine for women, because they're testing a lot of things on men. And sometimes some of them even say openly, why would we test on a patient that is prone to so many hormonal shifts and difference? But in doing that, we realize that we don't really have the knowledge to accompany the women in these shifts, and even without these shifts, because we don't test on them at all sometimes. And so, yeah, it's just like, I think it's a good step, like how medicine this past few years have been like more attentive to our differences as humans, because we are humans, but also depending on our ethnicity, on our gender, it can be very different. And it just feels like attentiveness to me, and attentiveness is love in a way, because like when you focus on something, you bring love to it. So it feels like society is bringing love to this place, even a little bit, but it still can make a big difference in terms of women's health and health in general.
Yeah, I was hearing about this recently too on the radio, that there were studies about this. Yeah, I heard about this last week. It's crazy too. It coincided with when you shared that, Nadia, the article. But it was saying that, yeah, like in the US, they studied it, and doctors tend to underdiagnose and underprescribe for women, and also for people of color in America. And it's probably true in other countries, Western countries. And also, right, that the effect is strongest in like women of color because of the nexus of those two identities and what we're moving through there. And I feel like it's really about feeling like it's okay to put yourself first and to value yourself as a woman, and to value yourself you know, as like a person of color, to know that you belong and that you matter, that you're important, because it feels almost like self-sacrificial, a manifestation of being self-sacrificial, that women experience this. And I was reading in that article to refresh about it, like women waited like 29% longer when they went to the ER for chest pain in the US in recent years. And doctors aren't as good at telling the signs of women having like urgent heart problems, which is really interesting. Like, it's really interesting how that plays out in the medical system. And I don't know, I feel like, I mean, my part for it would be to just love myself and know that I'm important. And for all of us, we can do that. And yeah, just claim our importance there and our value and our belonging. I relate to it as a transgender person too. Transgender people are very, very understudied in medicine. It's kind of presented to you like, so, you know, if you guys take these hormones, like, it does give you a higher risk of blood clots and heart disease and all these other problems. And if this is worth it to you, go for it. Yeah. You know, and that's kind of the attitude, except if you have a really nice doctor like Isaiah and I do. We have a very kind doctor. So medicine has, you know, that's where they are in the journey, okay? And we're all learning to prioritize how we feel and prioritize ourselves and value ourselves. And it's just, that's where we're at, okay? Transgender medicine only began in like the 1920s, so it's only been around for 100 years too. So yeah.
That's what I was feeling too. I was thinking about you guys when I was sharing about like how it was involving women and people of color more, like transgender people too, but you have to claim it, like really claim it. It's about prioritizing ourselves this time. But yeah, you really have to claim it, because otherwise you're going to be there for a century. Trust me, because my dad, who's a doctor, sometimes we talked about lab tests and how it's sometimes inaccurate for Black people for some blood tests. And he just says like, well, that's it. Like, we just gotta do with it and do a little equation, and it's going to tell us approximately if you're in good health or if you're at risk and in danger or not. And that's just it for the specific test. And otherwise medicine wouldn't advance, and we wouldn't be anywhere, and blah blah blah. And it never sat well with me. And it's because you don't have to accept it. Wherever medicine is and its advancements are at the moment, we really need to claim being put forth as well and being put as priority, because we need to have the same amount of treatment and attentiveness. And we're just realizing while discussing this now that it comes from the inside, and we just don't have to accept it. Of course, it's there, and its alternative really helps us while they're still on the discovery of other things, but it doesn't mean that we have to stay there. So we need to be really attentive to ourselves, and really attentive to not like sit in stagnation as well. That's just what I wanted to say. Yeah. How are you guys feeling about it? Feels good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I resonate with that.
Yeah. All right. So we're moving to our last topic, which is like kind of debunking what is going on with the Ukraine and the rest of the world right now, and what is going on with like weapon supply and the safety of people. And yeah, we're just going to like touch base, because we've not talked about it for a while. And also it's been almost a year since the beginning of the conflict, and I feel like everyone everyone in the media is doing kind of statistics on what happens now and taking stock of the situation, especially because Biden also is in Eastern Europe as well right now. So yeah, let's just like unpack our feelings, and if you have anything to add, any information, like you're welcome to.
Yeah. So what was top of mind for me was actually about the things that this ex-Russian diplomat has said. There's a Russian diplomat who resigned. I think he was like one of the only ones who did after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He was saying that he was basically saying that like there wouldn't be these issues in Russia. There wouldn't be this war if it weren't for Putin, because Putin is a particularly psycho dude who has some issues to work through. And I appreciate, well, I understand what he's saying, but I feel like this is not correct, because I feel like in Russia, the population, the consciousness, there's some people, a good contingent is feeling or is kind of okay with the narrative that Russia needs to reclaim its imperial greatness and the greatness that it appeared to have in the Soviet Union. The fact that Putin sees people who are even more extreme than him as being like political competitors means that Russia isn't really, as a country, it has some transformation and some growth to do in that area. And I think that just saying that this is just this one guy, Putin, is the man who is causing all this is naive, and it doesn't really take into account the fact that we make choices collectively and we go through lessons collectively. And everyone has a choice as to how they want to respond, whether they want to oppose the war and as Russians or they want to leave, and all of that. And so that was one thing that's coming up for me. It was because there was this guy he was the head of it's called the Wagner, if you're an American, or you could say Wagner mercenary group in Russia. And they're a private military group that takes on they do Russia's dirty work in African countries and also in Ukraine as of recently. And this guy was gaining a political following because he was saying, man, I have my own private army, I enlist convicts, I get them out of jail and I put them to work, fighting for the motherland. And Russia's military leaders are so lazy and bloated and they don't know what they're talking about, and I'm the shit. And he was actually kind of competing politically with Putin. And then Putin was like, "Niet, you will not say this because you cannot criticize the Russian military." And he was saying like, don't say anything else, but he didn't remove him from the battlefield. And that's so telling, because it's saying that Putin actually knows that Russian people look at this dude and they're like, oh yeah, this guy's like such a hero, you don't dare demote him. And I was like, so I just wanted to point that out, because I was saying it's tempting to say, I know people want to say it's the leader, it's the government, it's not the people. But I feel like it's like a collective thing to heal through for Russia and for Russians to choose something different. And it is a process. It's something that has to be worked through. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that. It comes up a lot when I talk to people about, the Russian-Ukrainian war, and they're always saying that, oh, it's just the government, it's not the people. And I'm like, guys, I know it feels uncomfortable to say this, but it's a healing that the whole country has to go through, some way or another. What did you guys feel about it, or any other part of the war development?
I mean, that really resonates with me, because I feel like Ukraine too is somehow going through a similar pattern. Like, even though they are, on the receiving end outwardly, like they're on the receiving end, like they too are making a choice to attract that experience. And so like it sounds harsh, but you know, there's like spiritual truth in it. And I feel like both countries are kind of stuck in a, you know, Soviet era pattern where it's like this, it just seems to be like a lot of unresolved issues that stem from the past and stem from people that were in power that, you know, are no longer alive. You know, it just seems like this ongoing thing that didn't necessarily start with just Putin, like you said. You know, a lot of people, I mean, he seems to be a very interesting person who probably needs to work through some stuff, but it's really easy to like demonize him and demonize leaders, but it's always like a collective thing that, you know, we're working through. But I feel like most people are not willing to hear that, you know.
I think you touched on the core of it, and I feel like it really feels uncomfortable for people, but it's the truth. And a lot of people saw Putin as the beginning of a capitalistic era for Russia. But based on what we've been doing and even our conversations at the beginning of this discussion with Jeff and Shaleia, we know that it's the continuation of Soviet Union. And so it feels like trauma repeating. I feel we've already talked about it a little bit, but it feels like trauma repeating, and how it illustrates like how it manifests right now is that Russia should have won the war logically, but they keep losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers and even mercenaries. Mercenaries have lost like 30,000 or 50,000 people, which is not a small number. So even if they have pride, they're still losing a lot. And Ukraine should have maybe taken advantage a few months ago, but they keep manifesting this shortage of weapons, or at least NATO keeps manifesting this shortage of weapons. So NATO is being blamed as having a crisis right now in terms of materials, but it's really what Ukraine is manifesting. And so it feels, it's so complicated, but the way you said it simplified it, like it boils down to there is some type of trauma repeating and choice of stagnation there, stagnation again, that is going on, and that, yeah, it just feels like there is this block, this status quo when you feel into a situation, something that is not moving. And I think it feels very uncomfortable for people, but it's like nothing is happening, and yet it's still a loss because a lot of people are losing life in many forms in this space.
Yeah, I feel like that's why they always say like history repeats itself, but that doesn't have to be the case. It doesn't have to repeat itself, but you know, I feel like there's so many areas in consciousness where there's like these traumas that seem to always be like geopolitically related that just continue to play out until the lesson is learned and, you know, it's exhausted.
Yeah, I feel with Ukraine, and a lot of countries all around the world, and in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, you know, they're just healing the feeling that they have. It was the feeling that they had to like give some of their power away to like abusive leaders, and they had kind of like they felt bound to them, and you know, in a relationship with them, and it wasn't not it wasn't necessarily ever comfortable or anything, but there was a feeling of, I remember Granville shared a while ago this description of how like Ukraine was like the abused, like let's say for the purposes of this example, like the girlfriend, and she was in an abusive relationship with this guy, Russia, and she had learned to live with Russia and had some mutual support, but it was abusive, and then she decided to leave, right? And the consciousness of Ukraine is one where they had some leaders who were supported by the Kremlin, who were like, let's have closer ties to the Kremlin, but then they had some leaders who were supported by the majority of the population who were saying, let's be closer to Europe and the West. But then I feel like the key of it is to really feel like we should love ourselves for ourselves, like we should claim our power and we should grow our strength. It's not, the first thing is to focus on yourself, and then after that you form cooperative ties with other countries, you know what I mean? And so yeah, and I think they're learning that. And what do you guys make of how, like, why is it that Ukraine is always in this relationship with the West? Ukraine is always saying, we don't have enough weapons and you guys need to send more. And then the Western countries are like, oh, well, we don't really want to. It might make Russia mad. I don't want to. And then they give in and they're like, okay, we'll send more. And then it keeps repeating, like Zelensky says, hey, we keep needing more. What gives with this? What do you feel
feel like, it's like a twin flame relationship. No, not really a twin flame relationship, but there's something in Europe and NATO that says it doesn't feel good to give in this space in that way there. And I think that's because Ukraine is maybe leaking its energy, and it's going to go into a shortage again. And so energetically, I feel like anyone knows it's a bad deal, but they don't know how to explain it because they don't reflect in terms of energy. So they say like, no, Russia might get mad, but it's not about that. I feel like it's a bad deal, and it's a bad deal that Jeff pointed out in the very beginning is that Zelensky and Ukraine really needs to take responsibility for themselves. And they did in a way, but the way they're playing victim in other parts, it's less visible now, but there's still like this victim mentality, and victim mentality is not the way. Like, no one is going to save you in your place. And energetically we know, like, if Ukraine had made the choice to be fully independent and take responsibility, I feel like the uncomfortable truth, it wouldn't have mattered whether NATO had intervened physically or just by sending weapons. They would have been faring better right now. So it's really just a choice, and just honoring where there is an energy leak there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Ukraine is a country that has been really, really corrupt. And like Zelensky's been weeding people out of the administration who have been corrupt and have been misappropriating funds and other things. So maybe that has to do with it, but yeah, that's true. And that's something that they would need to weed out. So yeah, totally. Well, you guys, we are at our hour. Do you guys have any closing comments about any of these things? Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more juicy content from the Church of Union. We look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about these topics. If you had any opinions or feelings about it, and any knowledge and perspectives. So thank you. We'll see you next week, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.